Welcome to another edition of Green is Good. I'm John Shigarian, your host, and today I'm honored to have with us Brad Buscher. He's the chairman and CEO of VaporLok Technologies. Welcome to Green is Good, Brad.
Well, thank you, John. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning.
You know, Brad, you have a fascinating company that's really important with regards to the sustainability and recycling movement that's now spreading around the world. But before we go into talking about your great VaporLok products, can you please give us your background story? You have a fascinating history from banker to expert on Mercury. Can you walk us through that before we get talking about VaporLok?
Well, I'd be happy to, John. Basically, our story is somewhat of a convoluted one. I used to own and operate a chain of rural community banks based in southern Minnesota. And if you think about it, running a community bank is really a small exercise in microeconomics because you get a sense of the ebb and flow of the communities at large, what makes them work, what doesn't, where the problems are. And you have to be kind of a little dim-witted not to pay attention to the ones that work, and particularly ones that are focused on renewing or recurring revenue.
Right.
And over a period of time, we started to look at where the future is going to lie in various different things, and we started to invest our capital accordingly.
And you invested in a Mercury company?
Well, here's how that worked. I sold the banks about 22 years ago.
Yeah.
And we basically kept our group together. My banks are a little different, John, because they're really finance companies disguised as banks. We financed a lot of esoteric stuff that the other people wouldn't touch.
I gotcha.
We were the founders of the Indian gaming, finance industry here that started in Minnesota.
Wow.
We were on the ground floor of syndicating, investment, if you will, in finance for a number of underprivileged multifamily housing projects around the country.
Right.
But it all started here in Minnesota. So when I sold, we kept our group together.
Okay.
And we went out and said, all right, we can do the same thing, but now we're going to do it with my own capital.
Okay.
We started to surround that with bright young entrepreneurs. And one day, lo and behold, this young man walked in my office with an idea that I thought was too good to be true. And it was originally right after the Clean Air Act was passed in 1992, and he had this bright idea, let's go get in the lamp recycling business. And I kind of looked at him and I said, what? Why would anybody want to do that? And he started explaining about how prolific lamps were, and I said, but why are people going to have to recycle them? And he gave me a little quick, short primer. I call it an edumacation on Mercury, which at that time I didn't have. And let's start paying attention to why this is important. And, we dug in, and sure enough, he was right. And a year ago was the seeds of a company. He originally approached me to finance it. I looked at him. His name was Mark Edlin. I said, Mark, I don't really think this thing is financeable. However, this thing might make a perfect entree for an equity partner. And, of course, his follow-on question was, well, then why don't you consider it? And after a long pause and kind of dull air, I said, well, I guess since I just told you it should need an equity partner, why not us? So that was really how it all got started out, John.
And that was in the early 90s where you invested in Mercury Waste Solutions?
Well, it was in 94. We started the first big company in 1995. And what we really did was we focused in the industrial sector. There's a vast amount, for your listeners that may not know, Mercury is an element. Right. It's prolific. It's virtually impossible to try to give you a short list of what it's used in. It'd be easier to give you a list of what it's not been used in somewhere along its lifespan, incremental or instrumental in the either the manufacture, development, or the conduction of electricity. It's an acid, a solvent, a reactive. It's a standard measure of temperature and pressure, and it has very unique properties, and it's a solid state, it's a liquid, and it has a very low gas, if you will, pressure point, and it starts to vaporize at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Unfortunately, it also has some very negative health attributes, John.
Right.
It's bioaccumulative, neurotoxic capabilities that can really make human beings not feel so good.
Right.
That was the real driver behind why we wanted to get in that industry. And we ultimately then, it was a big science project. It took me 15 years.
Wow.
But we built the largest plant of its kind in the world. And it was, railroad car quantities full of stuff, soils, big reactors.
Wow.
Huge amounts of chemistry had to go into figuring out how to extract it. And what our business really was is we were going to change the composition of what it was in to get it back to its elemental form.
Got it. And how does Mercury Waste Solutions then lead into the genesis and evolution of VaporLok?
Well, one of the divisions we had inside Mercury Waste Solutions was a company called LampTracker.
Okay.
That was the first of its kind that invented lamp recycling that was basically in a prepaid container. And our business model was different than anybody else at the time because we went after the small, if you will, collectors that didn't have an outlet to have truckload type quantities, and the costs were prohibitive at the time. And furthermore, they didn't really know what to do with these things. If you only got one or two lamps that are coming out of service, where do you put them?
Right.
And most of them were storing them in unsafe conditions, often in the janitor's closet, or worse, right next to the power plant where the heating or forced air, systems were in the place. So, and they break, as you may know, and
Sure.
I'm sure many of your listeners know.
Sure.
Lamps are fragile.
Yeah.
They break easily. Perhaps every one of us at one time or another in our lifespan has broken one or two or three.
Right.
And that, because of the low vapor pressure and the relatively high ambient temperatures that we keep buildings, it would proliferate. And so the notion, John, is that people become indiscriminately exposed and unwittingly to, an element which has very bioaccumulative toxic characteristics to it.
Right.
In fact, today we'd allege that, and I think the rest of the scientific world would concur, that your chances of mercury, if you will, exposure are often more from incidental exposure from products such as lamps, which are prolific, than it is from any other source. Although, today we worry about eating fish, as we well should, or at least moderate what we're eating.
Right.
We have to be concerned about what we're breathing, but, by and large, why should we put ourselves at risk to deal with spent mercury-containing products that are right in our homes or our place of business, particularly if we're unaware of it.
Right.
So that company then became an evolution to really try to find a way to safely contain it during its period of time of accumulation, and then ultimately to send it out through the common carrier system to get it disposed of at a proper recycling facility. Over time, John, what that really developed into was a health and safety product. We were not just in the lamp recycling business. We were in the health and safety product business.
Right.
And our evolution at the time, which was, a paradigm-changing product, was that we worked hard in conjunction with a couple of universities, principally the University of Minnesota, to develop a product that could safely contain it. And we developed a proprietary packaging and methodology, which we went on and applied for and were later granted a patent around that. That business scaled very nicely, and indeed the driver for it, John, was the compliance feature, because with our reverse tracking mechanism, we could provide, if you will, analytics, to the generators that were impossible for them to get in any other way to make sure that they were compliant. In some cases, some of our big customers actually used it to make sure that the warranties that the manufacturers are providing on new lamps were consistent with what the average, real lifespan was.
Right. That's interesting.
As you may be aware, if you walk into any department store, lighting is an important and integral part of, how they merchandise their business, and, the right lighting footprint is very important. So consequently, they'll go in and do what they call prophylactic relamping periodically. And that's often to change the lighting so you don't get the dim or the flickering lights, but periodically just to improve the look or the feel or the touch or the tone. And so as a result, there would be large quantities of these things coming out, and they had to have a safe and effective way to handle them. And that's where LampTracker came in.
And before we get into the story of LampTracker and more about VaporLok, I just want to welcome our listeners. If you just joined us, we've got Brad Buscher on. He's the chairman and CEO of VaporLok Technologies. And to learn more about all of his innovative and important products, go to www.VaporLokProducts.com. It's VaporLok products.com, VaporLokProducts.com. So talk a little bit about the focus of your VaporLok technology, Brad.
I'd be happy to, John. So in the development of VaporLok, we really looked hard at these products that we had developed under the LampTracker brand name.
Right.
We ultimately sold both Mercury Waste Solutions and LampTracker to Waste Management, who had the scale to really run these things and grow them. Which is frankly what we do in our merchant banking entities.
I gotcha.
We kept the core technology that had to do with the roots or the foundations, if you will, of VaporLok, And what VaporLok really was the technology that wrapped around to contain this stuff, to make sure that it didn't escape, providing it was properly packaged. And as time went by, John, what we really started zeroing in on is that we were doing such a great job of containing it. But what happens to somebody if one of these packages breaks, it rips,
right,
it's dropped?
Right.
We've done such a great job of containing it, how do we now protect people from those incidental exposures? Because all these things are fragile, as
right.
I've, recently mentioned.
Right.
So that led to a circuitous conversation that took about 5 years and multiple $1 million more research time. That we wanted to focus on now really turning that thing into not just a containment vessel, but a vessel that could actually capture the element as it became volatilized. And so that we really had several safeguards that were built in. That was not a small undertaking, and indeed it was over the heads of at least our limited scientific knowledge that we had. And so we decided to go out and we're going to find the experts in the industry, which led us into a very circuitous way through an entity based in Columbus, Ohio, that is in the nuclear gas absorption industry. They were basically the principal founders behind radioactive particulate scrubbing that happens in virtually every wet cell nuclear power plant built in the United States and most of them overseas. And after a relatively long courtship, it took them some while to really even appreciate what we were trying to accomplish. We entered into a joint venture together to, in effect, come up with a solution to solve that. And the genesis of that was this new invention that we have called, VaporCAPTURE, which now is basically it's a carbon impregnated matrix that goes inside these containers, John.
Okay.
So when inevitably these lamps break, and I can assure you that they all break at some point in time.
Right.
Now, as the mercury is volatilizing,
right,
it's now can be captured, and it can be captured at such a high rate that there's virtually no escape beyond the thresholds that any of the standard federal agencies are currently concerned about.
So I'm on your website right now, and I'm looking at all your fascinating products, your VaporLok technology, Capture Advantage. And so explain to our listeners then, your technology can be mailed out or shipped out to a person or an entity or a business that has light bulbs or other issues that need to be protected from breaking and getting mercury into the environment, and then ship them back to your recycling facilities and make sure that the environment on the en route process does not get damaged in any way or no mercury is released.
Well, you just pretty much nailed it right there, John. The notion behind the product is that it's there as a backstop for when something breaks.
Okay.
And inevitably they all break, as I mentioned.
Right.
And it is shipped out integral in the package when it's sent directly to either the single user or the multi-store distributor, or possibly through a lighting distributor where
right.
Matrix, whichever way that we in that particular case are going to market. Those are then, basically then involved or wrapped right into the package so that when it's returned to us, if there is a breakage, we can be relatively assured that it's been contained, and then we put that through our normal reclamation process on the back end.
And you're the only company in the world that has this sealed process. None of your competition has any type of VaporLok seal that protects the mercury from then disseminating into the environment.
To our knowledge, there is no one that is on this particular esoteric niche, John.
Wow.
And further, there's no one that's really focused on the science that stands behind it. It was interesting that, we're the owner or holders of about 17 different patents in various of our different companies, and some of them took up to 17 and a half years, to get fully vetted out and went through trial and tests and whatnot. But the average time was about 7 from start to finish. This last 2 pieces of technology that we got patented, from the day we applied to it until the government signed off on it, was 7 months.
Wow.
Which gave us a pretty good indication that this was a paradigm shifting, if you will, evolution.
And you mentioned earlier Nucon International and Waste Management. Explain how you interrelate and your company, VaporLok Products, interrelates between those 2 entities, and how are they involved?
Well, You can think of Waste Management as really our vendor partner.
Okay.
Not only do we sell two prior companies to them, they are the licensee in the United States for the VaporLok technology.
Okay.
And indeed integral in virtually every product they ship out. They have now incorporated our VaporCAPTURE, if you will, matrix.
Wow.
And this gives them a unique position in the marketplace that, virtually no other competitor can have. As you can imagine, that is not an insignificant, item for them, because waste is the largest solid waste transporter and also one of the larger haz waste companies in the United States today.
Wow.
And this was a unique evolution for them.
Got it. So they have a big advantage with your technology.
Exactly.
Got
exactly.
It.
So they're a perfect distribution partner for us as well.
Got it.
We also have a number of products and ranges which, the average consumer would never come in contact with for large industrial scale, if you will, shipments of materials that also need to be protected. And whether it be large rectifiers, mammometers, or even roll-off size quantities of soils, John, that you can incorporate this technology in.
And then how does Nucon interrelate with VaporLok products?
Well, Nucon is our basically our co-inventor on the product. They are the manufacturers of the matrix, and also they're the ones that are doing all the QC and stand behind the science.
Got it.
So we treat them like a vendor partner. They manufacture and make this to our specs. We then downstream and enclose it in each one of the packages. It's run through one of our fulfillment centers, and these are shipped out, depending on whether I said it's either onesie, twosie, or, to multiple locations.
Got it. And Brad, we're down to the last 2.5 minutes or so. Can you share with our listeners, what are the recycling rates for lamps? It sounds like you've got a business that's not only doing well now, but it's continuing going to boom in the future. What are the current recycling rates, and what does the future hold?
Well, that's a great question, John. One of the reasons that I'm still in this industry, and I'm passionate about it, that all the people have been with me now for many years is that the recycling rates in the United States are still abysmally low. And that's a function of a number of different reasons. But predominantly, it's about public awareness. And secondarily, there really hasn't been safe and effective ways to accumulate these things. Now, marry that with if you will, the sunset of the manufacture of incandescent lamps in the United States, let alone the sale of them. And there's a conversion going on as we speak right now to more energy-efficient lighting. And there's really three alternatives. LEDs, which I'm sure the public is well aware of, light-emitting diodes.
Yeah.
There's an ESA-compliant halogen lamp that's out right now, but that generates a tremendous amount of excess heat. There's an ESA-compliant incandescent, which really doesn't provide much energy savings vis-a-vis the old incandescents at all. And then you've got CFLs, both for at-home and the standard fluorescent 4 and U-bends that are in the commercial and the industrial marketplace. With that explosion of volume and that focus now on energy efficiency, one of the unmet needs is, what do the consumers do with these things? Right. Most consumers have been schooled and trained to take your incandescents and throw them in the garbage. Virtually every state in the union bans them now from their landfills, and many have more prescriptive regulations and laws on the books that have handling mechanisms in it. But there really hasn't been an efficient and safe way to do that. This was a gigantic, if you will, hole in the armor of that well-meeting infrastructure that was put in place.
Right.
So our notion was pretty simple. Let's find a way and look through distribution channels, John, to get just basically the core package in people's hands. So when you take those CFLs out of service, what do you do with them? Where do you take them? And how can you easily find a place to send them in or take them for recycling? We think eventually this will probably be part of a single stream system, but we're not quite there yet. We've got some more work to do, both with the, if you will, the public marketplace and the regulatory marketplace, and also with the, I'd say the public relations piece to educate people again about what's really going on here. The discovery we had, John, and I glossed over this.
Yeah.
That was really the epiphany behind it, is that it took some time, and really the science behind developing it you can't measure or you can't manage anything you can't measure. That's
Right.
Jack Welch axiom.
Right.
And it took a long time to even come up with the instrumentation to measure how high these levels went on the inside of a standard package, both a CFL pack and let alone an industrial pack for the 4-footers. And when we found out how very high, dangerously high those levels went, we knew we really had to do something about it. We had to get going hard here with the R&D effort to come up with a product to meet that. And once the public, let alone the regulators and the marketplace and individuals find out about how high those levels are, they're going to want to protect themselves of it. Because most people can't afford LEDs right now. They'll come, but when they do, in the meantime, there's going to be a tremendous amount of these. They're going to have to be taken out of service and properly recycled. And it's our goal to hit that niche.
Well, to buy Brad's great products, go to www.vaporlokproducts.com, VaporLok products.com. Thank you, Brad, for being a visionary sustainability innovator and expert. You are truly living proof that green is good.
Thank you so much, John. Pleasure being with you.